There is a question that almost no one thinks to ask. When you picture an executioner's block, that weathered piece of wood stained by centuries of use, you likely imagine it as a simple object, functional, brutal, unremarkable in its design. But look closer. The surface isn't flat. It curves. A shallow depression, shaped like a crescent, worn smooth by time and by necks that once rested there. And here is the question that should unsettle you. Why? Why wasn't it flat? A flat surface would work. A flat surface would hold a head in place. A flat surface would allow the blade to do its work. So why did someone at some point in history decide that a curve was necessary? This episode is not about executions. Not really. It's not about the blood, the crowds, or the condemned. It's about something far more disturbing, a design decision. A choice made by someone, perhaps a craftsman, perhaps an official, perhaps an executioner himself, to shape wood in a particular way. A choice that reveals how societies engineer death to be easier to perform, easier to watch, and easier to justify. The executioner's block is not just a tool, it is a psychological artifact. And the curve at its center tells a story about power, submission, and the quiet machinery of state violence. Welcome to Evil Minds Dwell Here. If you're interested in how cruelty is designed, not just performed, consider subscribing. This channel exists to examine the architecture of inhumanity, the blueprints, the intentions, the things we build when we decide that killing is necessary. Let's begin. To understand the curve, we must first understand the stage it occupied. Public executions were not mistakes of history. They were not the unfortunate byproducts of less civilized times. They were deliberate, carefully planned, methodically repeated. They served functions that modern societies have largely forgotten or chosen to forget. The first function was instruction. When a thief was hanged in the town square, the message was not merely that this man stole. The message was that this is what happens. The execution was a lesson written in flesh, delivered to an audience that had no choice but to watch. Children stood beside their parents. Merchants paused their business. Farmers traveled from outlying villages. The crowd gathered not because they wanted to see death, but because death was presented as something they needed to see. Authority made itself visible through violence. The second function was entertainment. This is uncomfortable to acknowledge, but it is essential. Public executions drew crowds the way festivals drew crowds. Vendors sold food. Pickpockets worked the edges of the gathering. Pamphlets were distributed describing the crimes of the condemned. There was an atmosphere, grotesque to modern sensibilities, of spectacle. And spectacle, by its nature, requires a certain kind of performance. Death had to be watchable. The third function was order. This is where the design of the executioner's block begins to matter, because here is the paradox that authorities faced. An execution that appeared chaotic, messy, or uncertain did not reinforce power. It undermined it. If the condemned struggled too much, if the executioner hesitated, if the blade fell poorly and the death was slow, the crowd's reaction shifted. Sympathy emerged. Doubt crept in. The message of inevitability was replaced by the message of cruelty. And cruelty, when it is visible, provokes resistance. Consider what happens when an execution goes wrong. Historical accounts describe crowds turning hostile, stones thrown at executioners, riots sparked by botched hangings. The authority that sought to demonstrate its power instead revealed its incompetence, its humanity, its fallibility. This was unacceptable. And so, over centuries, execution became a science of control. Every element was refined: the height of the gallows, the length of the rope, the weight of the blade, the shape of the block. Each adjustment served a single purpose: to make death look inevitable. Because here is the psychological truth that rulers understood long before modern psychology gave it a name. Disorder creates sympathy. Order creates acceptance. When an execution proceeds smoothly, when the condemned walks calmly, kneels without resistance, and dies in a single stroke, the crowd does not see a person being killed. They see a process being completed. They see justice being administered. They see the natural consequence of transgression unfolding exactly as it should. The horror becomes routine, and routine, over time, becomes invisible. Ask yourself as you listen, would public executions still work if they looked messy or uncertain? Would they reinforce authority, or would they expose its violence for what it truly is? The answer shaped every tool of execution, including the curve. Now we arrive at the block itself. Imagine for a moment that you are the one kneeling. The crowd is behind you, the executioner is beside you, and in front of you is a piece of wood, perhaps 2 feet long and 1 foot high, with a shallow depression carved into its upper surface. You are told to place your head there. This is the moment when the curve does its work. A flat surface would allow options. Your head could turn, your neck could shift, your body could tense in ways that might create resistance, might delay the blade, might force the executioner to adjust, to recalculate, to become an active participant in your death rather than a passive operator of a system. The curve eliminates options. When your neck settles into that depression, your spine is forced into a specific alignment. Not the natural alignment of standing or sitting or lying down, but an alignment of exposure. The cervical vertebrae extend, the throat opens. The muscles of the neck, which might otherwise tense in self-protection, are stretched into vulnerability. Your body is shaped into compliance before your mind can resist. This is not incidental. This is design. The curve also restricts movement in ways that are difficult to appreciate until you understand the physics of the human body. When your head is cradled in a depression, the range of motion available to you shrinks dramatically. You cannot easily turn. You cannot easily lift. The simple act of raising your head requires muscular effort that works against gravity, against the shape of the wood, against the entire physical situation you have been placed in. Most people in that position do not move, not because they have accepted death, not because they are brave or resigned or spiritually prepared, but because the design of the object has made movement feel impossible. The curve is a physical argument against resistance. And here is the psychological dimension that makes this truly disturbing. Posture shapes emotion. Modern research has confirmed what executioners understood intuitively. When the body is placed in a position of submission, head bowed, neck exposed, spine curved, the mind follows. Resistance becomes harder to imagine. Defiance feels abstract. The body's helplessness becomes the mind's helplessness. The condemned does not simply rest their head on the block, they surrender to it. The curve does not just hold the neck, it bends the will. If this kind of psychological breakdown is valuable to you, liking the video helps this channel reach the right audience. We are not here for shock value. We are here to understand how power operates through design, through the quiet choices that make obedience feel natural. We have spoken about the condemned. Now we must speak about the one who kills. There is a comfortable myth that executioners were monsters, sadists drawn to violence, men and occasionally women who enjoyed their work with a perverse relish that set them apart from ordinary humanity. This myth serves a purpose. It allows us to believe that killing is difficult, that only damaged people can do it, that the rest of us, the normal ones, would hesitate, would refuse, would be incapable. But the historical record tells a different story. Executioners were workers. They had families. They attended church. They paid taxes and worried about their reputations and hoped their children would find respectable trades. Many of them inherited the profession from their fathers, not because they chose violence, but because social stigma made other careers unavailable to them. They were, in most ways, ordinary. And yet, they killed, again and again, sometimes dozens of times in a single day during periods of political purge or religious persecution. They killed so routinely that the act became, for them, no different from any other labor. How? The answer lies in design. When killing is procedural, conscience becomes optional. Consider what the executioner experiences when the system works correctly. He does not choose the condemned. That decision belongs to judges and courts. He does not determine guilt. That is established before the condemned arrives. He does not even decide the method of death. That is prescribed by law and tradition. His role is narrow, specific, technical. He positions the body. He lifts the blade. He lets it fall. The curve in the block is part of this narrowing. It ensures that the neck is positioned correctly, not because the executioner has forced it there, but because the design has forced it there. The condemned has done the work of submission. The curve has done the work of alignment. The executioner merely completes a process that was set in motion by others, designed by others, authorized by others. His hands hold the axe. Responsibility is distributed across the entire system. This is what psychologists now call moral disengagement. The separation of action from consequence. The diffusion of responsibility across multiple actors so that no single person bears the full weight of what has been done. The executioner did not condemn. The judge did not kill. The king did not swing the blade. Each participant performed only a fragment of the violence, and the fragmentation made the violence bearable. The curve is a small part of this fragmentation, yet it is a telling part. The curve means that the executioner does not have to struggle with the condemned. He does not have to wrestle a head into position. He does not have to look into eyes that plead or accuse. The curve has already done this work. The executioner arrives at a scene that has been prepared for him. A body arranged, a neck exposed, a task simplified. He is not a killer. He is an operator. This channel explores how systems, not just individuals, commit evil. Subscribe if you want more episodes like this, because understanding the executioner is understanding ourselves. Understanding how ordinary people, under the right conditions, become capable of extraordinary harm. The executioner's block did not exist in isolation. It was part of a longer evolution, a centuries-long project to make killing more efficient, more reliable, and more palatable. The early forms of execution were chaotic by design. Stoning required a crowd, each participant throwing rocks until death arrived through accumulated trauma. Burning demanded prolonged suffering as flames consumed flesh slowly. Drawing and quartering involved multiple stages of violence, each more grotesque than the last. These methods served specific purposes. They were meant to horrify, to demonstrate the absolute power of authority through the absolute destruction of the body. The spectacle was the point. But the spectacle has costs. It requires audiences willing to watch. It creates martyrs. It provokes unrest when the violence becomes too visible, too prolonged, too undeniably cruel. Over time, authorities began to seek alternatives, not kinder alternatives, more efficient ones. The gallows represented one evolution. A properly constructed gallows, with a trapdoor and a calculated drop, could kill almost instantly. The condemned fell, the rope snapped the neck, and death arrived before the crowd could fully register what had happened. The violence became compressed, concentrated, brief. The guillotine represented another. Invented in the name of equality and mercy, the idea was that all citizens, regardless of rank, would die the same quick death. The guillotine was a machine of extraordinary efficiency. A blade fell, a head dropped. The entire process took seconds. The executioner barely participated, he simply released a lever. Each innovation shared common features. Speed. The faster death arrived, the less time the condemned had to suffer visibly, to struggle, to evoke sympathy. A quick death was a clean death. A clean death was an acceptable death. Cleanliness. Blood was contained. Bodies were removed. The physical evidence of violence was minimized, managed, processed. The execution ground could be cleared and prepared for the next use with remarkable efficiency. Emotional distance. As methods became more mechanical, the human element receded. The executioner became an operator. The crowd became an audience. The condemned became a body to be processed rather than a person to be killed. This is the trajectory that the executioner's block participated in. The curve was an early attempt at what the guillotine later perfected, the removal of friction from the act of killing. Physical friction, yes, the resistance of a body that does not want to die, but also emotional friction, the hesitation of an executioner, the discomfort of a crowd, the political risk of visible cruelty. Progress did not make executions kinder. It made them easier to ignore. This is perhaps the most disturbing insight of all. When violence becomes invisible, it does not disappear. It simply moves out of sight. It becomes something that happens elsewhere, performed by others, authorized by systems too complex to assign blame. Do you think efficiency makes violence more dangerous? Share your thoughts in the comments. This question matters beyond history. It matters now, in systems of incarceration, in methods of warfare, in the bureaucracies that administer harm at a distance. We have examined the curve as physics, as psychology, as history. Now let us examine it as symbol. The curve is the shape of submission. When a person places their head in that depression, they are not merely preparing for death, they are performing surrender. The body bows, the neck extends, the posture itself communicates defeat, not just to the crowd, but to the condemned themselves. This is not accidental. This is the final function of the curve, to transform the condemned from a person into a position. Consider what is lost in that transformation. The condemned had a name, a history, relationships, beliefs. Perhaps they were guilty of terrible crimes. Perhaps they were innocent, victims of political convenience or mistaken identity. Perhaps they faced their death with courage. Perhaps they were terrified beyond words. None of this matters to the curve. The curve does not recognize individuals. It recognizes necks. It shapes all bodies the same way, reduces all persons to the same posture, prepares all condemned for the same fate. In the moment of execution, every human distinction is erased. What remains is only the physical fact of vulnerability. This is power made physical. The curve represents the moment when society decides that comfort does not matter, that dignity does not matter, that the individual's experience of their own death is irrelevant compared to the efficiency of the process, the clarity of the message, the smoothness of the spectacle. It is also, in a sense, ritualized humiliation. To kneel, to bow, to expose the most vulnerable part of your body to a blade you cannot see. These are not merely practical preparations for execution. They are acts of degradation. They communicate in the language of the body that the condemned has been defeated, that society has won, that resistance was always futile. The crowd sees this. They internalize it. And the lesson is not just about the condemned, it is about themselves. It is a reminder of what awaits those who transgress, a demonstration of what power can demand from a body. The curve is the moment society bends the individual to its will. We began with a question about wood, about a curve carved into a block, about a design decision made centuries ago by someone whose name is lost to history. But this was never really about the executioner's block. It was about how societies learn to kill without thinking. The curve is a small thing, a minor detail in the larger machinery of state violence, but it reveals something essential. Cruelty is not just committed, it is designed, it is engineered. It is refined over generations until it becomes so smooth, so efficient, so unremarkable that we stop seeing it as cruelty at all. We see it as procedure. This pattern did not end with the executioner's block. It continued into the modern era, into systems that hide harm behind paperwork, process, and professional distance. The assembly line distances workers from the product of their labor. Bureaucracy diffuses responsibility until no one person can be blamed. Algorithms make decisions without human oversight or human accountability. Harm hidden behind procedure. Responsibility diluted through process. Violence disguised as necessity. The executioner's block did not just shape the neck. It shaped how societies learned to kill without thinking. It taught us that violence can be made invisible through design, that cruelty can be made acceptable through routine, that the most dangerous systems are not the ones that look brutal, but the ones that look ordinary. If you want to understand how cruelty is built into systems, subscribe to Evil Minds Dwell Here. This channel exists to expose the design of evil before it becomes invisible. Because the curve is still with us. It just looks different now.